Hi, everybody. Today is Monday, November 3rd, 2025, and our friend Larry Johnson is here with us.
Hey,
What?
did your wife pick out that shirt? Did she buy it?
Yeah.
Man, she's got great taste. Want to hire her as a fashion consultant.
Yeah, thank you. By the way, you're shining.
Yeah, it's
Yeah, it's
uh,
beautiful.
this is a 20-year-old shirt.
Yeah, but
Oh
it's still
my
beautiful.
God. Yeah.
Yeah,
How did
the
that
colors
happen?
are so, yeah, here in Brazil, it's so popular.
Oh, is it?
Yeah, the
Cool.
color, yeah,
Yeah,
everything,
yeah.
the combination. It's, yeah.
All right. What are we talking about today? Anything going
Yeah,
on?
no, nothing. Yeah,
Nothing. Yeah.
everything's fine. Calm
Life's
down.
boring. Yeah. I'm planning a vacation to Pokrovsk, you know. Sorry.
Yeah. Please subscribe and hit like button, helping us reaching more people. And let me start, Larry, with what's going on in Gaza and with the Trump so-called ceasefire. And the reality of Hamas, I think it's so important to understand because Hamas is the main party in the conflict. If the United States decides to do something with the Gaza, with the Palestinian, they have to communicate with Hamas. Here is what we've learned from Israeli historian Avi Shalem. He's talking about what is the position of Hamas.
Something else about Hamas. In the West, only the Israeli narrative of that day is reported. That Israel was attacked and Israel had the right to resist, to defend itself. The Hamas narrative is never reported, and Hamas has issued a document with its narrative of the 7th of October. No one mentions it, and it's a very important document. It says strict instructions were given to the Hamas fighters only to attack military targets and not to attack civilians. We know that things got out of hand and atrocities were committed. We are willing to have the International Criminal Court or any independent body come and investigate what happened, and we will punish our people who disobeyed the orders. Contrast this position by Hamas with the Israeli position, which is not to allow any international journalists to go into Gaza. So the media cannot check for itself what's happening, what Israel is doing. And Israel refuses any independent international investigation of its actions. So here you have Hamas willing to have an impartial investigation of what happened on that day, and Israel completely not allowing access to the media, banning journalists from going into Gaza.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Larry, if Donald Trump is serious, he said he had an interview with 60 Minutes yesterday. The video came out and we watched it. And he says that he doesn't believe that the ceasefire is fragile and it's working. But if he's serious about that, he has to understand, he has to, get to the point that Hamas really wants to negotiate, communicate, and do it seriously. But it doesn't seem that Donald Trump is ready for that.
Are we talking about the same guy who settled the war between Azerbaijan and Albania? Is that who we're talking about? Hey, he doesn't know what he's saying. He doesn't know. He's settled, is it 8 wars, 10 wars, 20 wars, and he really deserves the Nobel Peace Prize, despite changing the Department of Defense to the Department of War. Yeah, no, he doesn't know. What's fascinating about this, a retired colonel in the U.S. Army Special Operations Forces. There's a difference between Special Forces, Green Beret, and Special Operations Forces. They deal with these units are top secret units, or at least were. And he pointed out to me, and I'd never considered this, but we'll put it in perspective. He calls Gaza Portland, Oregon. Why does he call it Portland, Oregon? Portland, Oregon is a little bit larger. The landmass of Portland, Oregon is a little bit larger than Gaza. Okay, think about that. We're talking about just one city in the United States. That's not it's not one of the largest cities at all. And that's larger than Gaza. Here was Israel, who reportedly mobilized, and he pointed this out as well, 300,000 soldiers to try to take Portland, Oregon. And they failed. The only thing that they've succeeded in doing is brutalizing the population, killing women and children, exacerbating political division within Israel between the Mizrahi and the Ashkenazi. And within this, all Trump is engaged with is let's call it a photo op, as well as an opportunity to boost Jared Kushner's real estate business. Get him into an extension of the Trump family. It really is disgraceful because they're trying to pretend that the ceasefire is intact. But Israel is not taking any steps to actually allow the Palestinians to have self-determination and to be an independent nation. They're not going to allow it. They're going to destroy them and figure out some way to do it.
Looking at the ceasefire, what's the next step? What is the next move on the part of the United States? But just putting out ceasefire doesn't seem to be a solution for the conflict in the Middle East. In my opinion, that would be hugely dangerous because Israelis, they're making some sort of restrictions for Hamas and for Gaza and Palestinians. But on the other hand, Israel is attacking them at will. And whenever they want to attack, they're attacking them.
Well, they're following the Israeli modus operandi, their standard operating procedure. Alistair Crook pointed out, I think earlier today in his talk with Judge Napolitano, that they've done the same thing in Lebanon. There's supposedly a ceasefire, but they go out and kill whoever they want, whenever they want, using violence. Which you can see how Trump sort of is getting a rush off that. He he's doing it too off the coast of Venezuela. Hey, I'm killing them because I think they're bad guys. Don't need proof. You don't need evidence. You don't need any kind of judicial procedure. Hell no, man. The old saying, might makes right. He's got the ways, the means to do it, and he's going to do it by God without any regard for the consequences. So they're doing it in Lebanon, and they're doing the same thing in Gaza, and they're doing the same thing in the West Bank. They just these crazed Zionists just attacked and destroyed a Christian village. Now, understand, not Muslim, a Christian village. It's because this is an ethno-supremacist organization. These Zionists, they're worse than the Nazis. They're in the same category with this elevated ideology about racial purity in their mind, and that anybody who doesn't fall into that category, whereas for the Nazis, they persecuted the Jews and singled them out, along with homosexuals and gypsies. But now here are the Zionists doing the same thing to Christians, to Muslims, and justifying it in the name of some mythical god that they created.
Yeah. Larry, J.D. Vance, he was talking at TPUSA, in which he was asked about the support of the United States to Israel and how Israel is different from the United States. Why does the United States need to help Israel if that's the case? And he tried so hard, in my opinion, to be politically correct and to give an answer to somehow the answer doesn't touch the left and the right, comes to the center. But he was attacked by two groups. I look at it, one of the groups are Democrats who don't like him. They want to do everything. He was hogging the wife of Charlie Kirk. They were making a lot of noise in that direction, that he's gonna divorce, and he's gonna these sort of ridiculous talks. But what was so amazing in the aftermath was the attacks on the part of Zionists in the United States. They say, and he's going to the direction that Tucker Carlson is in. And they were attacking both of them. One of them said, that's why Tucker Carlson's son is working for J.D. Vance, because they're coming from the same sort of mindset. They don't care about Israel. What is that movement, in your opinion, that is happening even within the Trump administration? These people, J.D. Vance is trying to be politically correct, but you see that sign that he's not totally agree with what's going on with Israel.
Well, look, this isn't new, I don't think. If you lock up a hungry dog inside a chicken pen and the dog eats the chicken, if you're surprised, you're an idiot. Okay? Because that's what dogs do. These Zionists, and I think it's really important to draw that distinction between Judaism and Zionism. I know there are some out there like Nick Fuentes who he conflates the two, and I think he's wrong in that regard. But the whole Zionist thing is a sort of a unique breed, and because of that, they assume a moral superiority to everybody else, and you basically got a genuflect kiss the ring to introduce some Catholic imagery into the metaphor. But they're a take no prisoners group, and you see it even today. They're arresting a major general, a female in Israel, for she was the one that helped expose the fact that these Zionist soldiers were raping Palestinian prisoners. And instead of, the Israeli nation rising up in horror and saying, "Oh my God, that's not us. We don't endorse rape of prisoners." Oh, no, man. The majority of these Zionists are embracing that and celebrating that. And basically saying, accusing her of being a traitor. What's wrong with you? So it's there's what we're witnessing, I think, with all of this is the Zionists are going to continue to overstep the bounds. I mean, they're already talking about eliminating Tucker Carlson, Candace Owens, as an example. So there are a vicious, and I'll say godless, group of people who masquerade, then suggest that they're entitled to do what they're doing because they got this special relationship with this magical guy in the sky. Yeah, I am not buying it. If a belief in God is a belief in a God that has created all people, not just this group as special, and to not even be able to come out and talk about that and challenge them on it it's seen now as a blasphemy against Jews, anti-Semitic to say that. No, this has nothing about being anti-Semitic. This has to do with being anti-science, anti-history.
The reason I don't get it, because all of them are the sons of Abraham. Okay.
Yeah, you pick and choose. You ignore, that Ishmael stuff. Oh, no, forget him. He was a bad son. Oh, I mean, look, it goes back to even in the beginning, within the first book of the Torah, the Bible, in the Old Testament, the whole symbolism of Cain and Abel. And this I think sort of clues you in. Who did God favor? Well, it was Abel, because one of them was a farmer who grew fruits and vegetables, presented that as an offering, and it was, but Cain, got him backwards. Cain was the one who slaughtered animals, was a killer, and that's who God favored. That should tell you something right there about how sick and twisted the foundation of that religion is. You favor the one who's a killer and not the one who grows, who produces. It's not my that's what it says. People don't say, "Oh, Johnson, you're making that up." No, go read it. And then you get all these religious excuses trying to explain. Well, let's this is where political spin started. We see politicians do. They get caught having sex with an intern, and they explain we're just mentoring the young man, mentoring the young lady. So at the outset of the story, and I know I'm going to irritate a lot of Christians too, but I'd say, folks, step back and recognize that if you create this deity, and in this deity, instead of promoting life, it celebrates death and blood sacrifice. That should tell you something about what is the foundation of this religion, because we're seeing it now manifest with the murdering of these women, children, elderly, just civilians who are not engaged in any military activity.
Here is, Larry, what Hillary Clinton was asked, what went wrong with the support of the U.S. citizens to Israel. What went wrong with they had a lot of support before, October the 7th. And after
Yes.
the October the 7th, this support is just diminishing as time goes by. And she was asked, what is the problem? And here is what she said.
Generation of Democrats do not feel that instinctive attachment or empathy or understanding for Israel that you voiced on the immediate days after October 7th. Is that how you see it?
Jonathan, I don't see it that way. I see it slightly differently, because I think it's a generational issue more than a political issue. I think young people, including young Jewish Americans, don't see it that way. We have done a miserable job teaching young people history. I had so many conversations, and frankly, they often started as confrontations with students, not just at Columbia, but elsewhere. Where were they getting their information? They were getting it from social media. They were getting it most particularly from TikTok, which is governed by an algorithm until, at least up till now, still largely manipulated by the Chinese Communist Party. So when you were having conversations with young people, what they were seeing, and because much of the information they get, remember, more than 50% of Americans, predominantly a much bigger percentage among young people, get their news from social media. All those people chanting from the river to the sea, when you ask them what river, what sea, they had no idea. I mean, this is a serious problem that goes far beyond the terrible, in my view, misinterpretation and unfairness that we saw post October 7th.
Yeah.
She's despicable. I mean, she's just despicable. Yeah, those young people on TikTok, my God, they were watching these bombs being dropped on civilians and destruction of hospitals. Pay no attention to that man behind the curtain. The great and powerful Oz. You know, that's what this is all about. You know, Hillary Clinton doesn't. She's got a lot of Zionist donors. She doesn't want to, don't want to piss off the money base, man. Keep that money flowing. So, give the kids credit. The history. They don't understand the history. Yeah, let's really understand the history going back to the Nakba. Let's understand the history of two of the prime ministers of Israel were bona fide terrorists. Yitzhak Shamir was one, Menachem Begin another. Irgun, the Stern Gang. These were terrorist organizations, and the definition of terrorism using violence against civilians for political purposes. And yeah, we embraced them. So, it just, she's a symptom of the sickness that infects the West.
They don't know how to deal with it, Larry. They don't know how to confront it, how to reason, in my opinion. That's why they're talking about the history. If they go in history, as you mentioned, they're not going to have anything to argue to convince these young people. And it's just putting the blame on TikTok. It's just so cheap to go in that direction.
Yeah. I'm surprised she didn't blame it on the Chinese. This is a Chinese conspiracy. They pretend like Israel's dropping bombs on innocent people. Don't you know that every single Palestinian in that area in Gaza, according to Ben Gvir and Bezalel Smotrich, they are all terrorists. Don't you know that? Therefore, since they're terrorists, because we say so, we can kill them. Even if they're just walking down the street, don't have a weapon in hand, we can kill them because they're terrorists. And a lot of Americans go along with that, as we've seen with what's happening with Venezuela. I draw the parallel with Venezuela. We're blowing up, drug traffickers in boats, even though we have no evidence that there actually are drug traffickers, and they're not shooting at us, and they're not, not doing anything posing a direct threat. But because we say they're bad, we can kill them. I mean, this really started in earnest under George W. Bush, and it was then embraced by Barack Obama and continued under Donald Trump and his first administration, and then by Joe Biden. So this is not a Republican or Democrat thing, man. This is bipartisan. It speaks to a deeper spiritual sickness that afflicts the United States.
And these people who are protesting in the United States, they're mostly educated, the most educated.
Yeah, well, and a lot of them, particularly at Columbia University in the early days of the protests, they're Jewish students.
Yeah.
And they're, you're an anti-Semite. Wait. Okay, let's please revisit these definitions for me. Well, you hate Jews. I am a Jew. See? Yeah. Try. I mean, if you try to apply logic to this and rational thought, it just scrambles your brain.
Yeah, they're trying to say that because Israel is the only Jewish state, that's why we have to support them. If you want to support them, you have to understand what they're doing is not benefiting you in a long run. That's the key. But they're somehow playing in favor of Netanyahu and his rhetoric.
Well, there was a time when Israel was very good at the public relations aspect. Like if there was an earthquake or some hurricane disaster, particularly in a Muslim nation, they would send Israeli rescue teams to provide aid and relief. And that bought them a lot of goodwill. But this whole Mizrahi collection of these extreme Zionists, they don't care about PR. They've like stripped off the mask. We're not going to pretend to be decent human beings. By God, we are what we are. We are entitled to this. This is ours because we got this book that says it's ours. Of course, we wrote the book. So, when you write the book and to make yourself the hero, the center of it, and then it ends good for you, gee, what a surprise. You wrote the book.
Yeah. Larry, here is what Amush Hochstein, the former U.S. envoy, said about the situation with Hezbollah. He believes that he's considering some sort of possibility that the government in Lebanon can disarm Hezbollah. Here is what he said.
Strengths, traditionally. One is its military might, and the second is its political strength in the country. They are politically at the weakest moment that they've been, maybe not as weak as they were 6 months ago, but they're weak. The country doesn't want them. Militarily, they are, the way I would define it is, they're too weak to fight Israel, but they're strong enough to fight Lebanon. So I agree with the position of a gradual disarming of Hezbollah. The government took a vote in Lebanon to disarm Hezbollah. That is unbelievable. That's a great moment. Now we have to implement it.
Yeah. Is he making some sort of fantasy about Hezbollah being the minority in Lebanon? Because what's your take on that?
Are you suggesting that facts matter? I mean, come on. The whole role of fantasy for these people is you conjure up what you want to see, and then that's all you focus on. Santa Claus, Easter Bunny, Tooth Fairy, and Hezbollah's weak and militarily out of it. I mean, it's just a load of crap. This is still all about the United States trying to recreate a fantasy land in West Asia, Middle East, whichever term you want to use. And we've been meddling and mucking around in Lebanon, good Lord, for a good 40 to 50 years. And Hezbollah, if you misdiagnose a problem, if you make assumptions that are divorced from reality, then you're not going to be able to fix the problem because you haven't even properly diagnosed it. Hochstein's not properly diagnosing it. He doesn't recognize that Hezbollah enjoys majority support in Lebanon. Yeah, and over the years you've had this split: the Lebanese Christians, and then Hezbollah, and then the Druze. So it's been a complex ethnic boilerplate. But what we've seen, and I just saw today that Hezbollah reactivated the old Syrian smuggling lines, things that go back thousands of years, and they've been rearming and rebuilding. In fact, I predicted that a year ago that was what was going to happen. Because people say, "Oh, now they no longer have Iranian support. Boy, they're screwed." No, they're not. And they actually, while the West likes to portray them as a bunch of, they wear a rag wrapped around their head and they're wild-eyed fanatics. The reality is they have a level of professionalism that, frankly, Israel doesn't have, which is one of the reasons they've been able, despite being, if you will, outmanned, outgunned, they've been able to survive and continue to survive. And, people like Hochstein, man, they're the ones that get to sit there in the decision-making spaces of Washington, D.C. and continue to exacerbate the problem, make it worse, not better.
Larry, I don't know if you saw the clip that Lavrov was asked about the participation or cooperation between Iran and Russia in terms of, he was asked if Russia is providing Iran with S-400, and he said that there is no restriction in that, in that sense. Here is what was his response.
Independent journalist. Two questions. First on Iran and Palestine. Second question on Iran. Did Russia supply S-400 to Iran, and what of the deal with the Sukhoi aircraft? Have they arrived to Iran? In regards to military and technical cooperation with Iran, we have no limits in regards to our military technical cooperation since the restrictions have expired, and we are currently engaged in the supply of those equipment that is required.
Yeah.
In other words, the answer is yes.
Yeah.
No, we've talked about this before. What we've seen in the aftermath of the 12-day war, that Iran came to its senses, and instead of trying to keep both Russia and China at arm's length, fully embraced, okay, yeah, we're gonna work with you and cooperate with you. And Russia and China reciprocated, both in when the so-called snapback sanctions were reintroduced by the Western countries. Russia and China were, they didn't waste any time saying, we don't recognize your sanctions. It's just you Europeans and Americans trying to bully Iran, and we're not putting up with it. We're going to do a business with Iran. So actually, I would argue that the economic conditions in Iran are probably going to start improving, because more countries are going to say, those sanctions are, we're no longer going to recognize or abide by them. And the same thing on the military front, with both the equipment coming in, but constant, regular consultations between military officers in the Iranian Revolutionary Guard and across the Iranian military, and with both Russians and China. So,
yeah. Yesterday, the leader of Iran said that he was asked by some people if there is some sort of possibilities for the United States and Iran to talk to each other.
Okay, we talking? Wait a second. Are we talking Pezeshkian or Khamenei?
No, I'm talking about the supreme leader of Iran.
Okay, that's why I was trying to clarify.
Yeah, the supreme leader of Iran, Ali Khamenei. Yeah,
okay.
He said that how you can communicate with someone that believes that you have to submit before talking, you have to obey what he's asking for, and that is not the the way that you communicate with someone. And do you think it seems that Donald Trump and his administration, they're trying to, behind the scene, to communicate with Iranians? There is some sort of lines and communications, but is that somehow similar to the first round of negotiations with they were negotiating well, and Israel was preparing to attack Iran? And how is the situation right now? How do you see it? Is Donald Trump feeling, just good with the current situation, with the current sort of, conditions between the two parties, or he's trying to do something, as he mentioned, he's a peacemaker. He wants to communicate with other countries. How do you see the situation?
Well, let's look at it first from Iran's perspective. Why would you deal with the United States? Why would you trust the United States? Why would you talk to the United States? I think that ship sailed. That's why Iran is dealing with Russia and China now in a very open and, I'll say, aggressive way. Look, the Trump administration and the foreign policy of his administration is, with respect to Iran, is governed primarily by this pro-Zionist slant, and people like Rubio in particular. So they're all about destroying Iran if they can. Now, what I found really, there's an article reporting out of Israel this week. I can't remember if it's Channel 13 or Channel 14, but they revealed that the Iranian retaliation following the attempt to decapitate Iranian leadership on June 13th shocked and surprised the Israeli defense and intelligence chiefs. And by day 4, day 5, man, they were saying, we got to stop this. This. We are being hurt and hurt badly. That, and I wrote around that time that it's actually Iran was being far more effective than anybody in the West would admit, but it was. And Iran demonstrated that they could unleash a missile and drone swarm on Israel that Israel could physically not stop. And that reality is out there. So here's now Iran, they're moving away from liquid fueled rockets to solid rocket fuel, which means it's much easier to get those rockets ready to launch, or the missiles. And, they've now got more robust air defense systems. So that's why I think it's increasingly unlikely that Israel is going to attack Iran again, simply because Iran has too much of a military advantage when it comes to missile technology. The only thing that would be a potential, could give Israel a temporary edge is if Israel uses a nuclear weapon. But then if they use a nuclear weapon, the world changes. Because other countries, other particular Arab Muslim countries will say, wait a second, are we going to be next? And, some of those, Pakistan in particular has nuclear weapons. So, that's sort of Israel's, suicide card. So, what we're looking at here is Iran is, it's not going to submit to the U.S. pressure to negotiate. Or if they do enter back into negotiations with the United States, the U.S. is going to have to make quite a few concessions that I don't think the Trump administration is willing to make.
Larry, if what we've learned from the first attack on Iran, it was just about the fighter jets. What else did they have in the attack? They had this terrorist attack before, the sabotaging, the system of Iranian system, defense system. And as time went by during the war, they just used their fighter jets.
Well, actually, the fighter jets were not flying into and over Iran. They were standoff launching, glide bombs, guided missiles, like cruise missiles. So they used standoff weapons to hit targets, but they weren't flying. The Israeli aircraft were not routinely flying over Iran. They still had enough concern about Iran's air defense system. Iran has now upgraded that air defense system so that it's not only capable of taking down aircraft, but it can take down cruise missiles.
It seems that Iran has the capabilities right now to go, to use fighter jets outside of the Iranian space. They may go, I don't know, to the borders of Iran, closer to Iraq, or they may go in that direction. That would help them. I don't know what would be the strategy on their part, but
no, I think I don't see them at all wanting to take that kind of provocative action, because if they did that, they'd simply be feeding into the Western meme that they're this bunch of crazed radical Muslims hell bent on destroying the West. Again, it wasn't Iran that attacked Iraq back in 1980. It was Iraq doing so with the encouragement of the United States. And there was the United States supplying Iraq with chemical weapons that were used against Iranian forces. So, Iran has been really more about self-defense. Yes, they do provide support, financial and military support to Hezbollah and Hamas. They've done that over the past in a way to promote the liberation of those people. But they don't have an aggressive and, if you will, imperialist policy. If nothing else, the story. So it goes back to 1979. So what are we talking about? 45 years. So the story for the last 45 years has been Iran has faced a number of outside generated threats to attack it. In addition to the Iraqis, you've got CIA and British MI6 subversion down in Baluchistan, out in the southwest part of Iran. You've had efforts from coming out of Azerbaijan and Armenia to try to destabilize. You've got the U.S. support for the Mujahideen al-Khalq. And there have been numerous terrorist attacks carried out inside Iran, predating what happened last, a year ago or this year on June 13th. You've had, previous attacks on nuclear scientists and murdering them in the streets. So, Iran, I actually think right now is a pretty positive time for Iran in light of its stabilizing its relationship with Russia and China and working within the confines of BRICS. And BRICS is going to be, I think, a way out for them, a way to escape.
Larry, the United Kingdom has supplied Ukraine with an additional batch of Storm Shadow missiles, and Bloomberg reported that. And in the United States, Pentagon is talking about they have authorized, they said to the President of the United States, they can send Tomahawk missiles to Ukraine. That doesn't negatively influence the U.S. stockpile. And it's all right now depends on Donald Trump and his decision to send them to Ukraine. Do you think that the war in Ukraine going to continue for the next 2 to 3 years?
Oh, no, absolutely not. The West doesn't have the capability to sustain that. And, Ukraine, is the trajectory for Ukraine is in the wrong direction. I think I may have mentioned, in our last conversation that while in Moscow, I did an interview with Azarov, the former prime minister of Ukraine from 2010 to 2014. And, during the course of our conversation, he said, look, when I took office in 2010, there were 57 million Ukrainians. He said, now 20 million. That's 37 million Ukrainians that have disappeared, or they've gone, 98% have gone abroad. There probably have been well in excess of 1 million deaths, 1.5 million, maybe as high as that. And you're right now watching the number of soldiers that are going AWOL, that are walking away. They got in the field and they abandon their posts. That's at unprecedented levels. It's soaring. And then what's taking place on the ground militarily. The first one, in 2022, Russia succeeded in capturing one major city, Mariupol. In 2023, they secured Bakhmut. In 2024, they secured Avdiivka.
Yeah.
Right now, you got a whole list of cities.
Покровsk,
Mirnograd, Kupiansk, Kramatorsk, they're now pushing in a way that Ukraine simply does not have an answer for it. So no, this war is not going to continue. But if the United States, it's one thing for the Pentagon to say, "Oh yeah, no, we got enough. We can send them some Tomahawks." Good. Who's going to fire them? I mean, all the public sources have claimed that it's going to require U.S. soldiers on the ground with these launchers that they're not sure they have to carry out those attacks. One of the things I did hear in Russia from multiple sources, not just one person, is the great concern about if the Tomahawk is introduced, this will be a game changer for Russia, because Russia then, up to this point has limited its response to things like the Storm Shadow, the ATACMS, the HIMARS. Tomahawk's a game changer because they can carry a nuclear weapon, and no Russian military planner in their right mind wants to be there and assume, oh, yeah, those Americans, they wouldn't use a nuke. Oh, no, they actually believe we would use a tactical nuke. So if they actually get deployed, and if one is ever used and it hits inside Moscow in a sensitive government facility, I would not rule out Russia retaliating against Washington, D.C. Yeah, I mean, I think that they are that serious about it. And that's, I think, one of the reasons why Trump, I'm pretty certain that in one of his conversations with Putin made it that clear. Don't go down this path, because if you do, you're going to be, lighting a fire that you can't put out.
You mentioned tactical nukes. Putin said these tactical nukes are far more powerful than those nuclear bombs in Nagasaki and Hiroshima, and which
True.
frightening.
Yeah, we that's how we use language. Oh, it's just a tactical nuke. It's not strategic. It's just tactical. Well, it makes a large explosion. It is. We keep, I guess we're exposing this fallacy that through enough violence we can solve the problem, and the Russians understand they've got a military component here, but they're also focused on the political components that have to come into play, and the economic ones. The West still fails to understand that they think that they're back in 1991, that they can create enough economic pressure or chaos on Russia that Russia will collapse internally. They're not going to happen. Russia, they've been there, got the T-shirt. They're not going back to that. The experience of the 1990s, and frankly, the role that the West played in trying to in exacerbating the misery of the Russian people, they haven't forgotten about that. It's still fresh in their mind. That's why you see this central banker, Nabulina. She is insistent on keeping inflation under control. So people say, see, the Russian economy is suffering because of the war. No, you nitwits. The Russian economy has stopped growing because of deliberate Russian government policy to stop inflation, because they had hyperinflation, at least two rounds of it in the 1990s, and they're not going back to that. So they're going to get inflation under control, which is happening. And, again, the West fails to understand the difference between a deliberate government policy to slow the economy as opposed to an economy that's slowing because of other factors outside of the control of the government.
We're 10 months in with the Trump administration. Looking at the last 10 months, is the Trump administration distancing itself from the war in Ukraine? Is somehow divorcing itself from Ukraine? Do you feel that?
Rhetorically, maybe. But in terms of actual actions, no, they continue to enable and facilitate. We've seen these in the last week. There have been two failed efforts to insert a Ukrainian special operations team into Pokrovsk. And I believe that they were there to try to rescue and extract CIA senior officers, paramilitary, those people who come out of what's called the Special Activities Division, SAD. It's CIA. It's sad. There's a bunch of sad people. But this was a GUR operation under Budanov. They've publicly admitted that on the Ukrainian side and American side. But Budanov has been, best buddies with the CIA. I mean, that's his godfather. So the CIA has been up and about this. He's not interacting on a regular basis with NATO and with the military, with European Command, U.S. European Command. He's dealing with CIA and CIA paramilitary operations. They're apparently, they made these two fatal attempts to try to get the personnel in there. They claim they're going in to strengthen the effort and try to help Ukrainian soldiers maybe tactically retreat. Nonsense. This, to make those two efforts in 3 days. First one was with one Black Hawk. Second day was with two. First day had 11. And the second day had 20 to 24, and apparently they all got wiped out. But there must be somebody or some group of somebodies that have significance and importance to the CIA. They're trying to get them out, and it doesn't look like they're going to succeed. We'll find out in the coming days.
Larry, is Zelensky still one of the main reasons of not having a successful communications between Russians and the West? Because I'm not talking about just Zelensky, the movement that is behind Zelensky, which is the British intelligence, the presence of the British intelligence in Ukraine. Because if Russia is, in my opinion, is trying to make Ukraine neutral, that neutral Ukrainian in the future doesn't, they don't want the British intelligence to be in Ukraine. They don't want someone in the hand of, the West, like Zelensky or Zaluzhny maybe.
Mm-hmm.
They want someone else in Ukraine. They don't want a failed state on their border. They want a functional state on their border. This is, in my opinion, the main points in the mind of Russians when it comes to the negotiations.
Well, I'm not sure they want necessarily a functional state in Ukraine. What do you base that on?
Because if not functional, because they have to help these people. If that's not functional, they can be, infiltrated by the intelligence from outside, and the society would be vulnerable from these sort of terrorist acts, these terrorist groups, growing and, somehow getting power in Ukraine. Because there has to be some sort of solution in that part. Russia should feel safe from Ukraine after all.
Well, Russia is not going to feel safe with respect to Ukraine until NATO is defeated and dissolved. The Russians have experience that in defeating terrorist insurgent organizations and campaigns. Look at what they did in Chechnya. That was a 10-year war. It was bloody. It was brutal. But the Russians demonstrated that they could decisively defeat a Western-backed terrorist operation that used Islamic extremists that the West had trained and employed in Afghanistan. And Russia defeated them, and then Russia rebuilt Chechnya. And Grozny today is one of the most beautiful cities in Russia. So I'm told. I've not been there yet. One of these days, I hope to get there and see it for myself. But my point is, they've already demonstrated they know how to solve that problem. And so if Ukraine wants to devolve into becoming just another tool, it's already a tool of the West, and it's as a tool being used to attack, they're already in that. That's what Russia's in the process of defeating, and they will defeat it. I have no doubt about that. What remains to be seen is how much of Ukraine is left. So the population's already down more than 60%. The western areas in Ukraine, the former territories of Poland and Romania and Hungary, they've got their respective ethnic populations in those centers that could maybe revert to the Hungarian, Romanian, or Polish roots. If Ukraine does not stop this war, and the oligarchs are the ones driving the ship, not Zelensky. Zelensky's just a tool. He's a front man. He's not the leader of the band. Yeah, he's just the pretty face they put out there. If the oligarchs don't decide, okay, we've got to settle this, they will lose Odessa as well, and they'll probably lose Kiev. And Russia's not losing any sleep over this. They are as determined as ever that they're going to bring an end to this one way or the other, diplomatically or militarily, but they are going to end it. They're going to end this Western threat that is created by the expansion of NATO to the east. And NATO can talk tough all that it wants, but it's proven it's impotent.
I think the example you gave us about Chechnya, that is hugely important. If Russia wants something like Chechnya in Ukraine, or they want Ukraine to be totally destroyed or separated, we know that Romanian, Hungarian, these minorities being separated from the western part of Ukraine. That is a huge question. After all, I don't know if they have the answer to that.
Well, I'm not sure what you mean. Because
I'm talking about the western part of Ukraine be unified somehow, managed as they did with Chechnya, or being separated, totally dysfunctional.
Well, I don't see Russia going into Western Ukraine to try to control it, govern it, or rule it. They are going to secure the rights of the Russian-speaking people in Ukraine, and that'll include, ultimately taking over Kiev at one point. This, it's the West that's struggling to figure out what the hell they're doing, because everything they've tried is blown up in their face. And I wrote a piece last week about Russia's not going to break. There is this assumption in the West, and it's been a very, very foolish assumption, that the West can impose economic sanctions on Russia that will cripple Russia in such a way that it will cause the people to rise up, overthrow Putin, like Putin's the problem, without understanding that Putin's the moderate. If you get some people like Medvedev come in, he's a much tougher character, at least outwardly. One of the Russian officials I spoke with while in Moscow, Galushka, he's got the #1 selling book in Russia right now, and it's about the Russian, sort of a history of the Russian economy. And he made the point very clearly. He said, look, what you guys in the West failed to understand is we don't need you. We don't need international trade. You could build a wall around us and we'd be just fine. And that's true. We have just seen this in the last couple of months, that Russia has now built 2 different types of commercial jet airliners using entirely components produced in Russia, not imported from Boeing, not imported from Airbus, entirely produced in Russia. Why? Well, when the sanctions were imposed back in 2022, they decided, okay, we'll go our own way, to quote the Fleetwood Mac song, and they have, and now they've produced 2 types of aircraft. That guess what? India will be buying some one of these days. China will be buying some. Countries in Africa will be buying. So all of a sudden, the United States has created a damn Frankenstein, and we don't have. We're not going to be able to put it back in the box because the Russians have finally realized we're done playing this game with the West. We're not going to be held hostage economically to the West, and the West fails to understand that. They think that they can, they impose these sanctions on Rosneft and Luftoil. Yeah, again, not understanding that their dealings were more with countries in Europe. It hurts the Europeans more than it hurts Russia. So, all right, that's my rant. I see Paul is here. Paul,
welcome, Paul. How's it going?
Great. Hello, Larry.
Hey, Paul.
Paul, I think what Larry just mentioned is so important because Donald Trump, in his recent interview at 60 Minutes, he was asked why is he not trying to put an end to the conflict in Ukraine, but putting pressure on Russia. He said that we have some sort of restriction limits to what we can do with Russia because we don't have that much of trades going on between the 2 countries. And I cannot put a lot of pressure on them because of these stupid decisions by the previous administration. He was talking about the Biden administration. And what is your understanding today of what's going on? And considering what Larry just said, which was important in my opinion.
Well, I don't disagree with what Larry said. I think the reason Putin can't be forced into Trump's solution, which seems to be a ceasefire, is that it doesn't serve Russian interest. And I don't think there's any chance of the West forcing Putin through sanctions to somehow give up on his basic intent, which I take to be a mutual security agreement between Russia and the West that gets NATO off Russia's borders. The main problem, as I understand it, for Russia is the insecurity that comes from NATO on their borders and American missile bases in Poland and Romania, and this is unacceptable. So I don't think there's any chance of Trump pressuring the Russians into a non-solution that lets Trump claim he's had another peace settlement.
Larry, what is happening right now? Donald Trump, instead of putting pressure on the Western European countries, he's putting pressure on Hungary not to restore.
I mean, how to win friends, or how to lose friends and fail to influence people will be Donald Trump's book. Not the opposite of Dale Carnegie, because here's been Orban. He was the lone voice in the wilderness defending Donald Trump even before Donald Trump was reelected, and now Trump turns around and basically screws him over with the oil when he gave concessions to the Germans, for God's sake. But and the Germans have been anything but warm and friendly to Donald Trump, and then he just completely insulted Orban and hurt the Hungarian economy. So yeah, no. Look, Trump's a disaster. He really is. I mean, he is indulged in this fantasy that he's the great peacemaker. He's not. That he's got some grand strategy that he's working on, which is, yeah. Look at his grand strategy with China. How did that work out? You know, he picks a fight and then has to back down after 8 months. You know, and we've come a long way from his, bold claim that the countries were lining up to kiss his ass. You just have to change 2 letters. Take the 2 S's out and replace him with CK. They're not kissing his ass; they're kicking his ass. Okay. So, on that high note,
I think what I would say is that Trump, who's the villain, or is it the neoconservative doctrine of American hegemony? I mean, Trump is a captive of the foreign policy doctrine. It's established, it's institutionalized. All the conservatives believe in it. And as far as I can tell, the liberal left does too. So the American president is captive of the Wolfowitz doctrine created by Zionist neoconservatives in order to use American military and money to clear Israel's enemies out of the Middle East. I mean, that's what we did in the 21st century. We destroyed Libya, Iraq, Syria, Somalia, Sudan, and Iran is still on the list. So it's the whole neoconservative takeover of foreign policy that is the problem, and Trump is the captive. I mean, why else did Victoria Nuland spend $5 billion to overthrow a Russian-friendly government in Kiev? And why else did we build up that military except to sick it on the Russian areas in Donbass? So any president is going to be a victim of that foreign policy, and no one's repudiated. Trump hasn't shown any sign that he even knows it's controlling him. The Congress has not repudiated it. The American foreign policy community won't touch it. Those of us who raise it get ignored and called names. So this is the real problem. You have we, the United States, are victimized by this Wolfowitz doctrine that they formed up in 1991 when the Soviet Union collapsed. It removed the only constraint on American unilateralism, and the Zionist neoconservatives quickly declared that our principal goal was to prevent the rise of any constraint on our unilateralism, and that's what this is all about. It doesn't make any sense, but it certainly can provoke a situation in which there's a nuclear war. I think Putin has been very responsible in not responding to provocations, but I continue to stress that his very responsible response has created the impression in the West, and certainly among Trump, that he's irresolute, he won't fight, he might even be a coward, and they can keep pushing. And so Putin's non-aggressive nature, which I think is intended to earn trust so that real issues can be dealt with, such as Russia's security, this has worked against him, because it's just like Alexander Dugin wrote the other day. Everything we did, hoping for goodwill, convinced the West we're weak and won't fight. And so they keep pressing, they keep pressing. At some point, there has to be a response if these pressures don't stop. And so that's the real situation. Putin is very responsive, has created the wrong impression of Russia's capabilities and willingness. And we are a victim of this hegemonic foreign policy that we have to prevent anyone else being influential. That, I think, is the serious problem. It's independent of Trump, although I agree with Larry. I mean, Trump. But that's my take on it, for whatever it's worth. If you haven't read Alexander Dugin's recent article, you need to read it, because I think what he says is absolutely, totally correct. That Putin has created the impression of weakness, and we're pressing it too hard. Now, when Trump encountered the Chinese leader, he found out there wasn't any weakness. And I think that's what Putin should have shown him years ago. What the Chinese, I mean, Trump went in like a lion and came out like a lamb. When you run up against somebody that's tough and stands up to you, you have a different impression. And so China gave us 1 more year in which we can have rare earths.
Yeah.
And Trump forgot all about the tariffs and all the rest. The tariffs never made sense, because they don't fall on the Chinese. They fall on American consumers and the American companies whose offshore production is in China. So China could care less about the tariffs. They don't fall on Chinese. They fall on Apple, Nike, and the Americans who buy the products. So the whole thing is in many ways, it shows that the people in Washington don't have a functioning grasp on the situation, and so they're just thrashing around doing stupid things.
Yeah.
Jumping out, let me just share one anecdote from one of my neighbors. So he's a wholesaler of baseball bats, hockey sticks, lacrosse sticks. They're all made in China. He has had to pay out $250,000 in tariffs that was not budgeted. It's hurting. He said what he's living off of right now is inventory. He had bought inventory in advance of all of these tariffs. But, he said he used to have like 50,000 baseball bats. He's down to 10,000 now. And so I just underscore Paul's position. Yeah. Anyway, you guys have a great day. I got to jump.
Now, hold on a minute, Larry.
Okay.
Let's say one thing. The same with the oil sanctions. See, a lot of Americans saw Luke oil underpriced. It was an underpriced oil stock. I bought it. Well, it's listed on my account as zero value because of the sanctions.
Yeah.
So the sanctions on the Russian oil companies have hit me.
Yes.
and everybody else who saw underpriced oil stocks.
Yeah. Meanwhile, it's raised the price of oil, and those and Russia's saying, "Okay, helping us make more money." It's crazy.
So I don't think it had any adverse effect on Russia, but it did on me.
Yeah. No, I agree with that. All right.
Thank you, Larry.
Okay. Have a good day. Good to see you, Paul.
See you.
Bye.
Bye-bye. Paul, how's it going?
Great.
Since you mentioned, Paul, the case of the rare earth, look at this graph here. The most economies that are heavily reliant on Chinese for rare earth metals, you see, comes from Brazil, goes to the United States, is 78% when it comes to the United States, the dependence on rare earth of China. And here is the second. What is the United States is trying to do? The New Deal between the United States and Australia. They try to sign a contract between the United States and Japan. Here is the second graph. In this, you see that, Australia ranks 4th in rare earth reserves. You look at Australia here. And it doesn't seem that Australia would be able to provide the United States with the level they need. And when it comes to Japan, they don't have the capacity, they don't have the infrastructure to refine the rare earth, because it's a whole process. It's not just, deciding about it and just making this, refining these, minerals. It takes time. It doesn't works that way. And I don't know, what is your understanding on the position of Donald Trump? You've mentioned his position and the meeting between the two presidents. You don't see that much of, friendship happening between the two presidents.
Well, I think as a result of that meeting that the American pressures on China are over and done with. I doubt we'll see any more saber rattling about Taiwan, any more threats of tariffs, which don't affect the Chinese anyhow. And that chart you showed, if I remember, between China and Israel, that's 65% of all rare earths. China has by far the most, and Brazil has not quite half what China has. And between the two, there's hardly any left for any. So it would be very difficult for the United States.
Yeah, it's 44 million. Yeah,
and 21. So
yeah, it's 21 for Brazil.
45, 50, 65.
Yeah.
So even if Trump could get all of the rest, it's probably not enough for the high-tech digital American industry. So I think pressure on China is probably off. It looks like Trump is switching to easier targets, Venezuela and Nigeria. Russia and China are too big. And I don't know where he stands now with Netanyahu and Iran. But it may be that Trump wants to find easier targets.
Paul, do you think that you mentioned Iran and Netanyahu, Iran and Israel? Do you feel that the threat of having a new war between the two parties is diminishing, or somehow is increasing as time goes by?
I don't know. I just don't know.
They're trying to communicate, by the way. They're trying to talk with Iranians behind the scene, the Trump administration. But nobody seems to care about that in Iran. They're talking, it's nonsense. They want us to submit, and we're not going to do that. We are ready for any war if Israel decides to attack us. And this is the tone in Iran.
Well, it may well be that the short war that I still think Iran should have gone ahead and finished and won. It just wiped Israel out. I think that was a strategic mistake on Iran's part. But that may have taught Israel that it's not an easy thing to go to war with Iran. And I don't know exactly what position Netanyahu is in Israel. There's opposition to him in Israel. And recently, one high-ranking official, a woman, leaked video of the Israeli Defense Forces abusing captives. And for someone inside the government to do that shows that there really is opposition to this criminal figure that they have as the head of state in Israel. So, and there was recently a large number of prominent Israelis, and I think also Jewish people elsewhere in the world, who signed a condemnation of Netanyahu. So I don't know how important these pressures are, or what effect they have on his hold. You know, it's a minority government he has. It's dependent on people that are really, really murderous, you know. And I just don't know how secure it is, if it's secure enough to bring some massive destruction into Israel. If he would love, of course, to have us do it, but I don't know that Trump can get away with that at this point. It'll be interesting to see what happens in all the local elections here today or tomorrow. I think that tomorrow, if Democrats make a good showing, or it'll be interesting to see. So I really can't say. At some point, I think Putin has to be more forceful just to stop all the talk about going to war with Russia. I don't really see how Europe could go to war. You know, Europe, the governments are now feminized in Europe, and feminized governments aren't very good at war. So I just kind of feel maybe it's some chance of it winding down. But if there's a new effort to pressure Putin, I think he can't any longer simply respond non-aggressively. He's going to have to do something to stop it, or sooner or later, it's out of control. I prefer to be as hopeful as we can for now.
Paul, I don't know if you saw on the Gray Zone News, and the new investigation on their website. It shows that the Israeli-linked AI drones now monitor U.S. cities, and it seems that they're trying to control what's going on with the protests against Israel, or something beyond that. They have something, but they're trying to monitor what's going on in the United States. What is of interest of this sort of movement, drones being used to control, to monitor what's going on in the United States?
Well, I don't know why the United States allows foreign drones in our airspace. That's the question. That's the question that should
Actually,
be
the
asked.
drones were made by U.S. company Skydio, but they were delivered to Israelis, and they're using by AI. They're using these drones to monitor what's going on. They're produced in the United States by you and used by Israel. This
Yeah,
is the
well, it doesn't really matter who produces them. If Israel is using drones in their possession in our airspace, I didn't realize the drones had that range to operate from Israel, but I'm not very knowledgeable about them.
These are AI. These are AI drones. They're controlled by AI.
I
And
see. Well, that's something Trump should stop. Whatever the purpose. Now, of course, Israel owes everything to its control over the United States. This is why it's so insistent on shutting down all criticism as anti-Semitic, as Holocaust denial, as hating Jews. They don't want any criticism of anything Israel does because the whole policy depends on American protection, American money, American military protection, diplomatic protection, and they don't want to lose that. So they're probably quite paranoid about keeping control. And I'm sure they'll do everything they can to keep control. You know, ADL, AIPAC, these are powerful lobbies. They're not even forced to register as foreign lobbies. So we are so much under the thumb of Israel that I sometimes wonder if we have any sovereignty. You know, I've made the point so many times that we've now had the first quarter of the 21st century, and our foreign policy has mainly been to clear out Israel's enemies in the Middle East. And we make up all kinds of lies and excuses to hide that. It's called a war on terror. So how are we sovereign when the main purpose of our foreign policy is to advance Greater Israel? And of course, when Netanyahu held up the map of Greater Israel, and then they announced that it now includes half of Saudi Arabia, and then they announced it includes Pakistan. President Trump, the Congress, the American foreign policy people, they didn't say, "What the hell are you talking about? Well, we're not. This is an absurdity. What do you mean?" They just accepted, didn't say a word. So they've got a lot of control, and they want to hold on to it, and they'll do whatever they think that takes.
Here is, Paul, what Tom Brock, the U.S. ambassador to Turkey, said about how the countries around Israel who have common borders with Israel should behave.
A recommendation is those countries whose boundary and border with Israel need to come to a border resolution. Israel has been very clear after October 7th, anything that threatens that border, they're not going to pay attention to the blue line, the green line, or the red line. They want normalization, they want a treaty and boundary agreement, and they will enforce it in their own right. The advice is, if you're on the boundary or border of Israel, and you're one of those countries, the first step, rather than thinking that you're going to fight them at the moment, is to align with them.
Yeah. The question today, I talked with Colonel Jacques Beau, the question is, Israel doesn't seem to like to define its borders. How can somebody know where is that border?
It's Greater Israel. Their borders now include Pakistan. Look, they're in Syria. The Israeli forces, at least the last I heard, they occupy southern Syria, right up to the borders right up to the city limits of Damascus. So their borders are expanding. You know, Palestine is disappearing. Jordan is a de facto Israeli puppet state. I don't know if Israeli forces are still in southern Lebanon. I do know that the Israeli assassinations of Hezbollah leadership were so extensive that there may be Israeli forces now occupying some parts of southern Lebanon. I don't know. You see nothing about any of this in media, but they are
in the southern part of Lebanon as well.
Okay, so their borders now extend into Lebanon. They extend into Syria, past the Golan Heights. They're now in southern, and they said we're here to stay. So their borders, and they've been clear about this for a long time, their borders are Greater Israel, which means the entire Middle East. That's Israel's borders. It's the Middle East. I don't know if it includes Iran. Probably not, but they don't want Iran as any kind of force that can interfere with them. I don't think Israel can do anything about that. That'll be left to us. And I don't know if Trump will do it. So that's and the borders are always expanding, you know. It's like I've already said, they've expanded them to include half of Saudi Arabia. And so that leaves one half of an Arab country left. And then they said, okay, it includes Pakistan. Well, that's not even Arab. They're not Arabs. And why does Israel want Pakistan? I don't know. But all of that is supposed to become Israel. You see, originally it was from the Nile to the Euphrates. It was a huge chunk, but now it's the entire Middle East. So that's their borders. That's their declared borders. So we've talked about it before, or I have, that the Arabs, instead of uniting and dealing with their enemy, they fell one by one. And they're basically gone, aren't they? I mean, they're gone. And you know, even Putin has pulled out on them. So Israel's situation today is much stronger than it was during the Cold War, when there was Soviet backing for some of the countries in the Middle East that we in Israel couldn't crack. Well, there's no Russian backing now, and both Russia and the United States are playing up to the former head of a terrorist organization, which has become president of Syria. Now, remember, we didn't want Assad because we call him a dictator. So now we have the former leader of an official terrorist group, cited as terrorist by the United States and I think by Russia. I can't remember. So in this sense, Israel continues to expand.
Paul, do you think that Donald Trump, without removing Zelensky from power in Ukraine, could achieve some sort of leverage on Europeans? Because as long as they have Zelensky in power in Ukraine linked to the United Kingdom and the intelligence of the United Kingdom, are they going to be able to, to practice their leverage on Europeans?
Well, first of all, removing Zelensky doesn't affect anything that the Russians are concerned about.
What I mean by removing Zelensky, Paul, is not just about Zelensky, about anybody in Ukraine who's linked with the intelligence in the West, specifically MI6, and those people, being someone from Ukraine, from those people in 2014, before the coup happening in Ukraine. I'm talking about those people being in power in Ukraine again.
Oh, you mean bringing back the Russian-friendly crowd?
Yeah, exactly. Which would work, by the way, for Europeans, for the Russians. That could help the situation in the western part of Ukraine.
Well, for that to happen, the United States and Europe and the British would have to agree that Russia has valid security concerns and that these concerns should be dealt with and accommodated. And so bringing back the former government, if they still exist, bringing them back, it could, in a way, perhaps for the Russians, a substitute for a more comprehensive security agreement, or at least they would see it as a good step forward that removes the problems they face of how to achieve Putin's goals when they don't want to use sufficient violence to achieve them. So if they could get the West to agree to that, it would be an improvement for the Russians. But I think the basic problem is the insecurity that the Russians feel from NATO on their borders and from this American foreign policy doctrine of hegemony. And there's no reason for all of these attacks on Russia. They know it, except hostility. And the Russians themselves have done nothing to cause the hostility. The hostility goes back to Clinton when he violated the promise of the United States government and put NATO on Russia's borders. And then we put missile bases in Poland and Romania. And then we overthrew a Russian-friendly government in Ukraine. And then we built an army, and so on. Well, the Russians didn't provoke any of that except by not doing anything. Maybe if early on they had acted in a very forceful way, it would have all stopped. And it's just progressed. It's gotten worse and worse and worse. And now Europe has agreed to put 5% of its GDP into weapons. And they're talking about preparing for war with Russia in a few years. And of course, we also used the Georgian government back in 2007, 2008 to invade South Ossetia, which was there were Russian peacekeepers there, and they got killed, and so Putin had to send in the army. So why did we do that? It was aggressive behavior, and Putin's unpreparedness was the opportunity. So it has to be at some point the Russians become convinced that the era of aggressive behavior toward Russia is over. And that's what it takes to have a solution. And this is not discussed. It's not discussed in Washington. It's not discussed by the foreign policy people. It's not in the literature. There is just a consensus view that somehow Russia has to be defeated. And the definition of defeat varies, but the whole notion is they're an enemy. And it doesn't seem to be people raising the question, are they really an enemy? Why are they an enemy? What did they do? Are we responsible for this? These kinds of questions aren't part of the discussion. So it makes it impossible for just any other kind of solution to work. The basic problem is the Russians feel insecure. And we keep making them feel more insecure. And so they keep developing nuclear superweapons. And Putin tries to use those weapons as a substitute for his own missing forceful responses. It's like saying, well, sooner or later, but it's not working. Trump wasn't impressed with, they announced 2 super weapons last week, and Trump wasn't impressed. And the reason is that the Russians have created this impression that they're really not resolute. And that's a highly risky situation. It's just because it invites more provocations. That's what has to be broken. That process has got to be broken because eventually it will lead to some major war. And of course, it won't go well for the West. We don't have any such weapons or any way to defend against them. So it's a stupid thing that's happening. And it only serves, well, it serves the neocons' ideology, but materially, it only serves armaments manufacturers to get more and more money. And the politicians who make these things happen, they get commissions from the sales. So it's a totally corrupt situation. And it feeds on itself because it produces money. And people want the money. It's more important to them than what might happen down the road from this.
Paul, I remember since the first time we talked, you've been mentioning that Russia, China, and Iran need to get together. We know today that Russia and China are so close to each other, and Iran is getting there. And in terms of when it comes to the security, to the arms, to the air defense systems, fighter jets, they're cooperating, but they somehow Iran is receiving from Russia, they're communicating to each other. Do you think that is changing as you were thinking of before? Is that happening? The partnership, some sort of partnership that goes beyond maybe alliance?
Well, Alexander Dugin, just the other day, in the article I referred to when Larry was still on, he said that what Russia needs is a strategic mutual defense treaty with China. He said that if NATO bothers us, they come in. If the Americans bother Taiwan, we go in. He said that, which has, of course, been my position for the longest time. So now Dugin says, I mean, he's a philosopher in Russia, but he's a very perceptive guy. I mean, and he says that's what we need. We need a Russian-Chinese mutual defense treaty. He didn't mention Iran, but certainly that would make it real. They had the three of them. And can it happen? Well, if I think it would happen if these pressures continue. Now, if the pressures on China are over because the Chinese let Trump know they weren't going to put up with them, and if the pressures on Russia stop just because we can't figure out what else to do, short of Harry-Carry, and we're not too anxious to pressure Iran for Israel because Iran has shown that it can really let Israel have it. I mean, they could do tremendous damage to the Israelis. So all of the pressures may just stop from inability to continue, in which case the mutual security agreements are less likely. So I think if the pressures continue, that you could see something like that, because at some point, if you don't want war, you've got to show them they're up against something they can't deal with. And I would have done it long ago. But So I think whether or not there's a Russian, Chinese, Iranian defense treaty depends on whether the pressures continue or whether they've maxed out. I don't see how we can do anything to China. They hold the cards, not Washington. And everything we've done to Russia hasn't brought them down. We brought down our allies and our own people. I'm paying for the sanctions because my oil investments are destroyed. They show up on my account zero value. Of course, they're not zero value, but they are to me because I can't sell them, trade them. I can't do anything. And this is the case with lots of people, and not Russians. So it may be that we've run out of pressure points. And I don't think the European people are capable of going to war. I just don't think it. Look, the latest poll was conducted by Le Figaro, which is the main newspaper in Paris. And it shows Macron, the president, has 11% support. He's supported by only 11%. Well, this is not
And
a
he's
country.
calling Putin dictator.
Yeah. And this is not a country that can go to war, and he keeps talking about sending French troops to Ukraine. Well, how? I mean, there's no government in Europe or the UK that has any strength. The people don't like the governments. And they're suffering under the governments. You know, the immigrant invaders aren't held accountable. People don't feel safe. They're bled dry to support immigrant invaders. It's just, you know, just the other day, Hannah Herland in Norway, who has an important news site, pointed out the extraordinary extent of rape of Scandinavian, Norwegian, and Danish women by immigrant invaders. I mean, it's fantastic statistics, and nothing's done about it. So how are countries that can't defend their own women going to go fight Russia? It's not, I don't know. It may well be that all of this, you see, the neoconservative policy never made any sense, but they pushed ahead despite its total irrationality. Israel's notion of greater Israel makes no sense. There are not enough Israelis or Jews in the world to occupy the Middle East. So how are they going to have from the Nile to Pakistan, or through Pakistan, because Pakistan is included in the Pakistani population is, what is this, 9-10 times the Israeli one, just Pakistan alone. So these things don't make any sense, and yet we see all this huge commitment to these nonsensical agendas. So it may be they're played out, you know. It could well be that all of this was so unrealistic that all it could do was cause massive trouble for a while, but then it can't go any further. That's one possibility. I'm always trying to find something optimistic to offset the very depressing picture. And it could well be that it's just, you know, Trump found out he can't get anywhere with China.
No.
Iran doesn't show any real interest to surrender. I don't think they fight hard enough, but still, they're not ever saying, oh, we want to give away everything in a negotiation. And I think constraints are building on Putin's reasonableness. You know, Dugin's article holds him to account, points out that it's his very reasonableness that's causing Russia all these problems. And Dr. O keeps reporting that this kind of attitude is more and more evident in serious news programs, serious discussions, and that it's starting even to affect the ordinary people just because of the impact of the drones. They're now hitting 700 miles inside Russia and disrupting life. And so that all of this is closing in on Putin's ability to keep turning the other cheek and not notice. And that it's sort of his non-response capability is shrinking. This is what Dr. O concludes, and I think it's probably true from what I've seen. So it could well be it's all just going to come to some kind of end. Here in the United States, we have such a dysfunctional government, they can't even keep it open. You know, a democracy that can't keep the government functioning is dysfunctional. It's over and done with. And if you look at American politics, the Democrats, the whole thing is so factional and infused with hate. We've got Democrat governors, mayors, city councils. They hate Trump. They hate his efforts to deport illegal aliens. They are passing laws to block federal agents from exercising federal authority in their jurisdictions. These things are stupid. They make no sense. And it shows that they're so gone ideologically, they're not even part of the country anymore. These are all acts of insurrection. All of these states, Oregon, Washington, Illinois, Minneapolis, California, they're all in insurrection. It looks to me like, and look at this. We know for a long time now, presidents have removed the authority from Congress to decide on war. The presidents now make the decision. And in some cases, they inform Congress. In other cases, they don't. Well, now look what's happened. 2 Democrat federal judges have ordered Trump to make the SNAP payments. This is the reloading of the debit cards of 42 million Americans with the money to buy their food. Well, judges have ordered the executive to take legislative action for which he has no authority under the Constitution. Well, what does this mean? Well, it's a puzzle to me that Trump hasn't simply said, oh, thank you for the gift. All right. But it's the Democrat judiciary putting in Trump's hands control over the budget, irrespective of congressional authority. So there's no need for Congress. Here we have Democrat judges inviting Trump to be an autocrat and rule irrespective of Congress. You know, budgetary decisions are supposed to be a legislative matter. It's the Democrats who shut down the government. And now there's 42 million Americans whose debit cards have run out and they can't be reloaded, and where they're going to get money for their food. So what do the Democrat judges? They say, well, you, Mr. Trump, you've got to find a way that they get the money. So they give him the budgetary authority. He should take it. Because in my view, the democracy is so dysfunctional it can't function. So we might as well have an autocrat. And I'd rather it be Trump than one of these woke Democrats. So if you look at the absurdity, and what's Trump doing? We are so dysfunctional, the government can't stay open, but he's running around the world telling people what to do. I don't understand how this isn't the subject of endless cartoons and commentary, but nobody notices. I've pointed it out, but I've not seen anyone else point this out. He speaks as if he owns the world, but he can't. The government won't function, and he can't even recognize when the Democrats are giving him the power of the budget, which means we no longer need the Congress. He could just simply say, don't ever come back. We don't need you anymore. I make all the decisions. The courts have just told me I make all the decisions. No more senators, no more representatives. We don't need any of you. You no longer have any function. The courts have given it to me. It's an extraordinary thing. It always happens. See, all democracies fail because of faction. They can't hold together. No democracy lasts or has ever lasted. Our founding fathers knew that, and they spoke about the danger of faction. And Thomas Jefferson said that at best the American system might last 200 years. Well, it's gone. A democracy that can't keep the government open is dysfunctional. And the judges have now admitted it. The Democrat judges, this is an Obama-appointed federal judge who wants to give Trump budgetary power. Well, if Trump has it, the Congress doesn't have it.
No.
Well, if the president can decide on war without Congress and can decide on the budget without Congress, what the hell do you need Congress for? You don't need Congress. They haven't got any role. And the fact that he doesn't realize this is extraordinary. It's the federal judiciary has given him the appointment of dictator, and he won't accept it. Well, that's my main point.
Yeah.
That's my main point, and we can't deal with our own affairs. How in the hell are we going to deal with everybody else's? And we can't run our own shop. How can we run around threatening everybody else? And all the tomahawks we were going to give Ukraine, it turns out we don't have any to give them. We don't even have enough for our own defense purposes.
Yeah.
So it's hilarious. It's just a hilarious situation.
It really
That's
is.
it. It's the other way to look at it, rather than how serious it is. But it's also it's funny.
Exactly. Yeah. You have to laugh. Thank you so much, Paul, for being with us today. Great pleasure, as always.
Well, thank you, Nima. Thank you very much.
See you. Bye-bye.
Send me the URL.
I'm going to send it right away.
Oh, Nima, is this going to be our permanent time from now on, 10:30?
Yeah, exactly. Exactly. That would be a permanent time, because the time difference between you and me right now is 2 hours. That's why I've changed it to, yeah.
So it's gotten worse because of us going off of daylight saving time?
Yeah, exactly.
Okay.
Yeah.
All right.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Goodbye.